The 1992 Tennessee Bureau of Investigation interview with Gary Sutton unveils a grim portrait of family dysfunction, drug use, and violence surrounding the homicide of Tommy Griffin.
Right, this interview really sets the scene for what happened to Tommy. Gary, the interviewee, knew Tommy Griffin very well. He explains that Tommy practically lived with him as much as he did at home.
That's a striking detail. So, Tommy felt more at home with Gary than with his own family. What does Gary say about Tommy's family dynamics? Were they close?
Not exactly. Gary describes Tommy's family, his sister Connie and brothers Bill and James Griffin, as a strange family. He mentions they were prone to drinking and fighting, especially when on pills. It sounds like Tommy was often on the receiving end of abuse from his own brothers.
That's a disturbing picture. Does Gary give any examples of this abuse or Tommy's relationship with his family members?
He does. Gary recalls an incident where Tommy's brother Bill fought with Gary, and Tommy actually stood up for Gary, telling Bill to back off because Gary was his friend. He also mentions finding Tommy with a swollen face and busted lips after Bill and James Griffin had allegedly beaten him up when they had a few beers. Gary implies that Tommy's family would sometimes get aggressive after drinking.
So Tommy seemed to be the more vulnerable one in that family dynamic, despite his generosity towards Gary. You mentioned pills. Was there a particular drug involved in their family's issues?
Yes, Gary specifically talks about Xanaxes. He said he'd seen Bill take 10 or 15 Xanaxes at once, and that their mother received a couple of hundred pills or more a month, which they would pass around. He feels the whole family was pretty decent until they got on these pills.
That's a lot of pills. Given Tommy's eventual death, did Gary have any theories about what might have led to it, especially considering these family tensions and drug use?
He has a strong theory centered around drug trafficking. Gary believes Tommy was transporting drugs for someone named Bobby Floyd, often by hiding them in his prosthetic leg. He had warned Tommy repeatedly about the danger of getting involved, especially since, if caught, Bobby would simply deny knowing him. Gary thinks Tommy's death has something to do with a drug bust that happened a month or two prior, where Bobby Floyd and others were arrested.
So Gary suspects Tommy was involved in a larger drug operation. Let's trace the events of the day Tommy disappeared. What happened that Friday?
Gary recounts that he and James, his uncle, spent the day drinking beer. They went to Puggy's, then stopped at a store near where Maxie's old car lot used to be. While there, a girl approached them, asking if they knew where to get smoke or snort. Tommy, who Gary describes as a big bullshitter and looking to connect with the girl, offered her some Xanaxes he had from his mother and eventually left with her.
Tommy left with this girl, but Gary didn't get her information or her car's license plate?
Gary admits he was pretty well intoxicated from drinking since about 9 a.m. that morning. He said he never thinks to get details like a tag number when he doesn't expect nothing like this is going to happen. He describes her car as a small, dark-colored Ford, possibly an older model Falcon, a two-door.
Okay, so Tommy leaves with this unknown woman, and Gary and his uncle James head home. What happens next?
Later that night, Connie, Tommy's sister, called James's house saying Tommy's trailer was on fire. She called again, worried, asking about Tommy's whereabouts. James, after some hesitation, told her Tommy was with that girl. Even later, Connie called again saying Tommy had been arrested and was in jail in Blount County.
And Gary and James went to pick him up.
Yes, Gary says James frequently bailed Tommy out, having spent a lot of money on him in the past. When they got Tommy out, he didn't have a shirt, so James gave him his own. The mysterious girl was waiting outside the jail for Tommy. When confronted about his burning trailer, Tommy just laughed it off, saying all Yun's doing is lying, and that he was having some of that tonight, referring to the girl. Gary thinks Tommy was likely high on Xanaxes at that point, perhaps 15 or 20 pills.
So Tommy was more interested in continuing to party than dealing with his burning trailer. This paints a picture of someone heavily under the influence and perhaps detached from reality. When did Gary learn about Tommy's death?
He learned about it the night before the interview when Boyd, Tommy's brother-in-law, called James's house. Tommy's body was found by the river near Walland. Gary emphasizes that Boyd and James were the only family members who seemed to care for Tommy.
This leads back to Gary's theory about drugs. Does he have any other pieces of information that might support this?
He reveals that Connie's sister called Linda, saying Connie had been looking for a small caliber pistol. Gary finds this suspicious, although he isn't sure why Connie would want one. He also believes James Griffin, Tommy's brother, and another person named Tammy know more than they're letting on about Tommy's death.
That's quite a claim. Why would Tommy's own brother withhold information, especially if he was so quick to accuse Tommy of being a narc?
Gary explains that James Griffin and Bobby Floyd were also involved in getting and transporting drugs. James Griffin smoked pretty heavily, according to Gary, and he says he himself and Tommy's uncle James had warned Tommy to stop messing around with the drug transport. Gary believes James Griffin's accusation of Tommy being a narc could have been a way to deflect or justify some action related to their own involvement in drugs. He genuinely believes Tommy was not an informant.
It sounds like a tangled web of family rivalries and drug dealing. Gary, do you think Tommy's generosity might have been exploited by those around him, especially if he was getting drugs on credit?
Absolutely. Gary says Tommy would often get drugs on credit, paying people back with his check at the end of the month. He'd trade $50 or $75 worth of drugs. So his generosity, combined with his drug use and his family's volatility, certainly created a dangerous situation. Gary honestly believes Tommy went to get drugs for the girl he left the store with, and that's where something bad happened.
This TBI interview with Gary Sutton gives us a chilling glimpse into the complex and often violent world that Tommy Mayford Griffin inhabited. It suggests that a combination of deep-seated family issues, rampant drug abuse, and involvement in drug trafficking likely led to his tragic end. If this conversation made you think, consider sharing it with a friend.